Thanks for coming. There's a lot of, it's intimidating, all the talk of technology and the things going on, all the use cases and the potential for blockchain technology. But at the bottom line, at the end of the day, a lot of us are here because ICOs or token generation events or whatever you want to call them are a new, easier, more egalitarian way to raise money for your business, often without giving up equity. And we have here on the panel 3 experts, maybe 3.5 if you count me, on different ways to launch ICOs. My name is John Wagster. I'm a partner at Frost Brown Todd. We're a 500-plus person law firm in the middle of the country. My office is in Nashville, Tennessee, and I am co-chair of our blockchain and cryptocurrency practice. And I'll ask each of you guys, starting with Slava, to introduce yourself, give us your elevator pitch, tell us a little bit about what makes your company special and better than the others.
Sounds good. Hello, I'm Slava. I'm one of the founders of Indiegogo. If you've heard of it, we launched 10 years ago to democratize access to capital. We started out with a perks-based model where you just give money for stuff in return. That was trying to go around the Securities Act of 1933. Since then, we send money to every country in the world, 70 countries actually each week. We've done over nearly $2 billion of volume to just under 1 million entrepreneurs. We've always lobbied Congress to try to get equity crowdfunding to happen, and in 2011, we were able to do that. In 2012, it passed. In 2016, we launched with our equity crowdfunding offering, actually for investment. So you can actually crowdfund and get profit in return. And right away, the crypto folks started jumping at us saying, whoa, if you're doing equity crowdfunding, help us with our blockchain offerings, which became known as ICOs. We launched that last year, and things are going really well. If you want to know how we differentiate ourselves, it's really 2 things. 1 is trust, and 2 is reach. So on the trust side, we've been working with investors for 7 years. We have a broker-dealer as part of a partnership that most folks don't have. We've been working with regulators since 2011, as opposed to just knocking on their door last week saying, will you approve this? And we do all the AML, KYC, all that stuff in-house, no problem. And then in terms of reach, we have nearly 10 million backers. We have over 100,000 accredited investors, and we have a top-notch crypto book. So we're very proud of the fact that when you raise money on Indiegogo, a lot of that money you've never seen before, it comes from strangers.
Hey everyone, my name is Andy Bromberg. I'm one of the founders of CoinList. And CoinList is a platform where the best digital asset companies manage their token sales and where investors find quality deals in the space. We've publicly worked with a very small set of some of the highest quality crypto projects, Filecoin, Blockstack, Props, Origin, Trust Token, and that's just 5 publicly out of more than 2,500 inbound projects that have asked to work with us. So very selective about who we work with and promote publicly. Privately, we've worked with dozens more of the top projects and are just working to help all of these projects manage their compliance, manage their sale process, and attract some of the best investors in the space. We have a couple services. We have a compliance service we offer really broadly to a lot of token sales. We have a full sales service where we do that public effort and help them with the whole process of running a token sale logistically. And then we have a new airdrop service helping to conduct compliant airdrops in the United States and abroad, allowing token networks to get early adoption and build their early network effects. And at the end of the day, we're just trying to help issuers who are building these incredible projects, many of the people here at this conference today, to launch those projects, get the financing they need and the distribution they need.
Galen?
My name's Galen Moore. I'm the Director of Market Research at New Alchemy. New Alchemy's founder DNA started back in 2011 with a company called CoinLab. And we started New Alchemy in 2016, beginning doing smart contracts and code audits for other people's smart contracts. And we've expanded on that business. Still a very technology-driven company, but we now do marketing, branding for token issuers. We have broker-dealer relationships and are building our own broker-dealer capability. And we also do token mechanics and advising people on the structure of their token economies. I would say our capabilities in terms of security tokens and the sort of what people call utility tokens, we can talk in a little bit about how much I hate that word, ranges the gamut there from one to the other.
Great, thanks. A lot of brain power, a lot of experience here on the panel. We appreciate it. So I was going to talk a little bit about ICO history. This panel is called Token Issuance Models. They started out sort of, and I'm not going way back, but really the modern age of tokens in the beginning of 2017. They started sort of on the Ethereum model. A lot launched in no tax or low tax jurisdictions in Europe. They created foundations that hold their IP, and the founders or the members made money by doing service agreements with that nonprofit. And then as tokens started to take off, we started to see all sorts of crap in the market, for lack of a better word. We saw a lot of really crazy tokens. You just put blockchain on a piece of paper and you could raise a lot of money really fast. And it got so fast that the government started getting a little concerned, and they started making statements that sort of dampened the market. And then the SEC came out with a couple rulings in 2017, the Dow, that showed the reach of the SEC into countries outside of the US. And then the Munchie opinion that talked about, you know, the dangers of promoting your tokens in certain ways. And that sort of put a damper on the market. And so instead of seeing these raise as much as you can, as fast as you can, we started to see, you know, calmer heads prevail. And strangely and ironically, that really allowed some of the private equity guys and some of the real players in the space to catch up and to start launching their own tokens. So in late 2017, early 2018, we started seeing real players, Fortune 500 companies and others really starting to get into the space. So I'd invite you guys to sort of comment on that. Do you agree with that brief history? And how does your company, the things that your company is doing and plan to do, how does it reflect it in that?
I actually totally disagree with that narrative. I mean, I think there's no reason to be ashamed of charlatans in the space, right? You look at Andrew Carnegie, right, at the beginning of the steel era. He had like 12 different companies, all had the name railroad in them. You know, it's just like the word blockchain today was a buzzword. And if things had turned out differently historically, we would be looking at Carnegie and his ilk as frauds and scams. Every new revolution has an element of scamminess about it, and to say that that this is the first time anybody's raised money on a buzzword would be ignoring the city that we're in right now. The only difference is in the past it's been mostly confined to a small group of people who all knew each other. Right now, those scammers are potentially reaching your grandma. So, that is a problem for the SEC to solve, and it's a good thing that they're solving it. But I also think, and going back again to the analogy of industrial disruption, look, I mean, there's going to be ways that regulation can catch up with what we're doing, and there's going to be ways that regulation is going to need to change their game in order to catch up with what we're doing. And it's actually the latter category that I think is, as much as it's very interesting to take new methods and adapt them to the old way of doing things, it's much more interesting to invent new ways of doing things. So I'm very excited about that, utility token opportunity.
You hate that word, utility token. Yeah, you used it.
Yeah, I hate it just because I feel like it's very.
You're gonna call out my argument. I'm going to call it your wording.
The words between the lines there are regulatory escape, right? Which, as we all know here, is like it was a bullshit fantasy, right?
Andy?
Yeah, I do think on the regulatory side, it's an interesting point. I think at the same time, I'm not sure that we need a whole new book of laws to represent this industry, and I think the SEC has actually been pretty reasonable and clear in how they've approached the space. For a long time, they were watching it, 6 or 9 months of the ICO boom happening, and really didn't do anything at all because they wanted to sit back and understand what was happening and get a sense for the space. They started with some very basic, obvious, clearly fraudulent enforcement actions, which I don't think anyone really took issue with, them going in and doing those. And some of their recent statements have enforced the idea or reinforced the idea that I think a lot of us have had since the very beginning of this space, which is Chairman Jay Clayton of the SEC has said over and over again, I have not yet seen an ICO that's not an offering of securities. But there's nuance in what he's saying there, because he's not saying that he's never seen a token that isn't a security. He's just saying that he hasn't seen an initial offering at the time of offering where they were not offering securities. That's a really important point and is backed up by Bill Hinman, another SEC senior member who recently said that Ethereum is not a security. And those two statements, although if you think of them superficially, might come in contradiction, when you really think about that nuance, they don't. What Jay Clayton is saying is Ethereum at the time of ICO, although he hasn't said Ethereum specifically, was probably an offering of securities. Further down the road, Bill Hinman's now saying, well, it's sufficiently decentralized. It's now avoiding the issues, the Howey test, that we can say it's no longer a security. And I think that set of rules will stand for a long time with regard to the securities question in the space. Now, there's definitely some question of where that line is drawn, how we can actually draw that more effectively, give more regulatory clarity. But I don't think we need a whole new set of laws in order to address that. And I think a lot of the existing regulation applies pretty neatly to this space.
So just to, if I can just level set a little bit before you go, Slava, for those of you who don't follow as closely, many tokens are issued as utility tokens, which they believe exempts them from registration with the Securities and Exchange Commission. So when we talk about a utility token, that is by definition exempt, usually backed by the opinion of a law firm. And a security token is one that is not exempt, therefore it is subject by nature to the regulations of the Securities and Exchange Commission. We're going to dig into that a little bit later. I just want to clarify. Slava.
I mean, to get the Jobs Act passed, it took nearly 90 years, 9-0, from 1933. So the idea of there being like a whole new set of laws that are going to like radically change the way the SEC looks at this, I think is not realistic. I really wouldn't hold your breath. We've been working with them since 2011, and our point of view on it is that in 2017, there was a lot of folks trying to avoid regulation. So they tried to navigate this thing, which is called utility token, or otherwise trying to be non-security token, when realistically a lot of them are securities. But the reality is that I believe the market will be mostly security tokens. Like today, there's this avoidance of regulation that is slowly thawing out because of the clarity. Now it might go somewhere outside in the world, outside of the US, which is a wonderful debate to have. But in the US, I'm quite confident that a few years out, 95% of the market will be what is now security tokens, otherwise known as just securities, on some sort of blockchain, centralized or decentralized, which is a digital asset as opposed to a share. That's probably a very different point of view than most people in this room. But we've always, since we got into this space, thought that the Holy Grail is actually going to be in the security space. And right now, there's just a land grab of trying to make as much money on a protocol which tries to avoid regulation. And those days are going to be short-numbered. There probably will be some things that are considered utilities. We have electricity here. We have water. There's not that many utilities in the world, right? So if there's going to be some things that do get these extra rule or a framework that the SEC approves, it's going to be for very few companies or organizations or utility, whatever you want to call it. And a majority of the market will be governed by security-like laws.
So I actually think I agree with you on one point. I think it's important to view regulatory intervention as an opportunity, especially with the U.S. regulatory framework, which is the most robust in the world. Right, and so people all over the globe want that, investors all over the globe want that imprimatur on things they're investing in. But I still think that that's a kind of a backward-looking way of looking at the opportunity that's available when you consider that. I mean, I think I'm sort of guessing here a little bit. You have to read between the lines on statements like Bill Himmon's statement. But I think what they're saying is the reason Ethereum became not a security is because it achieved this level of decentralization where the founders can walk away from it. Right.
I mean, it's the same thing as PayPal. PayPal used to be illegal, and the banks tried to shut it down, and they tried to use regulation to shut down PayPal, but PayPal got far enough along that it's legit enough that they couldn't stop it.
In my home state of Massachusetts, it was illegal to buy Apple stock in the IPO in 1984. Yeah, that's a fact. Why? Because it was too risky. It was too risky, people.
Well, that goes back.
You just can't be trusted with
it
this.
It goes right back to the Securities Act of 1933. No, we laugh. It goes right back to the Securities Act of 1933. That's why it's such a big change. But at the end of the day, there's not a lot of bonuses given out in DC to the SEC folks for innovation. You don't get like an extra $100,000 for like putting something at risk.
But so I'm curious what you think about the legislation that's moving through the House now, right? Because they are talking
Before
about
we go too
expanding
deep in
the
there,
Jobs
we
Act.
don't want to get lost in those weeds. It's fair to say it's a challenge for all of us who obviously are optimists in this space. We're taking laws that were passed during World War II. The test that determines whether or not an investment is a security is from 1940. And we're applying it to some slightly different facts than those of an orange orchard, in the state of Florida in 1940. So practitioners disagree in the space about where the lines are drawn, but we all agree that they're going to be drawn favorably. I think it's important to know what Andy said earlier, is that while the SEC they're stomping their feet and they're saying things, talking about securities and putting some fear in the market. What they're doing is exactly what you want them to do. They're sitting back and waiting. The things they're doing are very few and far between. And when they go after somebody, it's a fraudster.
I think they've done a great job. I agree. Yeah.
What I think is going to be interesting, if you want to have a little prediction here, is 2016, I'm making generalizations here. Nobody talked about it. 2017, everybody used utility tokens. It's super hot. 2018, everybody's trying to figure it out. Utilities kind of freezing, things are going abroad. underneath, there's all these picks and shovels that are being invested into in the security market. There's hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars that are being invested right now into security token infrastructure. And not one of you have used it yet. Why? Because now one is open. And I promise that in the next 2 years, when these things all open up and there's massive competition for security tokens, and you'll be able to buy a piece of a hotel with your small amount of money because it's now fragmented into fractional ownership, it's a game changer. And you want to know what? You don't need to discuss the law. It's a security token. It's not avoiding anything. It's going to be massive, and it actually stays within regulation. So that's why I think people are short-sighted, trying to land grab at some free money and not get regulated. But in the regulated market, it's going to be enormous. And the only reason we're not talking about it is you can't do it today because the picks and shovels haven't done the work yet. But there's a ton of money going in right this second. I'm sure all of us are looking at that in the future.
Yeah, we at CoinList, we're incredibly bullish on the idea of security tokens. We think it's going to be a massive majority of the value in the market in the midterm. I do think there's one misconception that I hear a lot that's worth addressing here that we're all kind of talking about but glossing over a little bit, which is the difference between selling something as a security and having a security token. Most projects that are fundraising right now are intended at some point to be utility tokens. But the smart ones who have that intention, have understood that at some point they don't want to be regulated as security, they're still selling a security up front. And that's where you hear about these SAFTs, Simple Agreements for Future Tokens, and other structures like that. They're selling a security that represents future ownership of a token that is intended to be a non-security. That thing they're selling, that is not a security token. There is no token there. That is a piece of paper just like anything you buy in any investment in any company. It's a document that represents future ownership. And that, to us, is a big misconception. We hear people talking about all of these security tokens that have been sold. It's not true. People have sold a lot of securities that represent future ownership of non-securities tokens.
There's a couple security tokens.
There's a
handful.
couple, a half dozen or so, yeah. But what Slava's talking about, which is where we see so much of the value coming from, is in the future tokenization of assets and building tokens that are intended to always be securities, selling things that are securities at time of issuance, and also, no matter how far in the future you look, they'll still be securities. Things like fractional ownership in real estate, or interest in startups, or interest in funds.
Because if you've designed a utility token, which I prefer to call a network token, right? You've designed a token that's designed to capture the value of the growth in that network, right? Like imagine you're one of the first 500 users on Facebook, you're evangelizing the hell out of it to all the kids in your dorm, and you get to participate in the upside because it was all issued on a token, right? There's a token involved that captures the value and the growth of that network. Why would you want to sap that? If that was really a good idea, if it was like a Facebook level good idea and was getting that kind of adoption, why would you want to siphon off revenue into a security token? Why would you want to siphon off ownership into a small group of people who are never going to use the product or contribute to its growth, but are just going to participate in the upside because they provided the capital, right? And that's, I think, when I talk about like what's the sort of game changer here, it's that kind of development. And I do think that that kind of issuance will remain legal if people can meet that bar of look, you can't sell 50 million of those up front and still say it's a utility token. Like, that's bullshit. Don't go and try to sell $50 million worth of it. There's like one person in the world who can do that, and that's Elon Musk, right? Can sell Teslas in advance, right? You can't do it. So sell your utility token, build your network, distribute your utility token. And again, I would call it a network token. But I think, Andy's right. There's a huge opportunity in simply tokenizing the things we already buy and trade so we can buy and trade them more efficiently.
So to put a point on it again, just to drive it home, Andy said that a lot of anything that you see that's a pre-sale of a token, those are sold subject to securities laws, even though they're not securities themselves, and therefore they're only sold to valid securities exemptions, which is usually the one you're familiar with as an accredited investor. So those are sold as securities, but they are not themselves securities. So we're talking about securities. Sort of the antithesis of that, in my mind, is the airdrop. It's a new thing that we've seen. People are using airdropping tokens to populate their network. So if don't have securities and you need users, your airdropping tokens. Tell me how you guys address that. Is that a trend that's here to stay, and does it work for most of your clients?
We're very excited about airdrops, and we talked about PayPal earlier. PayPal, I think of as almost the original airdropper. If you think about when they were getting started, they gave $10 to every person who signed up and said, hey, come on and start using PayPal. And that hook of getting some sort of currency on that network was incredibly valuable to give people an incentive to come on, sign up, get addicted to the product, and then put their own money on in the
So
future.
I apologize. I should have described what an airdrop is for those who aren't familiar. It's when a token organizer gives away tokens for free, either to the general public, or sometimes they'll give free tokens to early purchasers, or they have other ways, promotions to give away free tokens just to get tokens out there so that they can be used in the market.
Right. And so I'm not a lawyer, and this is certainly not legal advice, but what we've come to understand is that for many of these tokens where their status as securities or non-securities comes into question, it actually may not be legal, and often is not legal in the United States, to give these away to people, which may sound silly, but if you look at the case for this, back in the dot-com bubble, companies tried to give away shares of their stock to people for free, and the SEC said, hey, you can't do that. That constitutes an offering of securities. So a lot of people have stepped back from airdrops in the past few months, in the past 6 months, and said, we don't feel comfortable doing this, while the question of when a token is a security versus non-security is up in the air. And we've sat down and said, hey, is there a way for us to compliantly conduct these offerings? And if you have something that might be a security, you need to do one of two things. Either register it with the SEC, which is not a viable path right now, or exempt it from registration somehow. And so our view is that there are ways to exempt these tokens to be airdropped from registration with the SEC that complies with US securities laws, that complies with international securities laws, which is different in every single country, and that it's really important to follow those guidelines if you're going to airdrop tokens at this point, when the certainty around what something is in terms of security or non-security status is up in the air.
Slava?
So whether it's airdrops or SAFs or SAFT or whether it's like Reg D, Reg A plus combos, I'm like just using a lot of jargon. In my opinion, this is a lot of just trying to get creative to avoid as many regulations as possible right now. And these are really short-term land grabs. If you want to be like Jeff Bezos style, it's like day one. If you look at it as day one, like these are very small incremental things, and it's much more about figuring out how blockchain is going to change many different industries and how people can invest in these things. And most likely, like I said before, over 95% of this market will be security tokens that don't need to get creative around these avoidance and trying to get around and skirt around the rules. So I don't want to comment on pro or con airdrop. I'm just trying to be a little bit more long ball about the thinking as opposed to try to like take advantage of the moment. Which is, I mean, for what it's worth, Indiegogo has been around for almost 11 years. Like, we have a brand of integrity for a reason. Like, we don't take shortcuts, and we don't try to make the extra buck in the moment. We're trying to have regulators, like we've known the commissioners for a long time, not when we wanted to know them this year, because we've known them from 7 years ago. It's like, these things take a while, and it's relationship building. Like, the SEC is not going to, on a whim, change a rule. Like, this stuff.
But you got, I mean, you got to acknowledge, right? The laws have got to change, right? I mean, forget tokens. Like, forget tokens.
Time out. You're talking to the guy who helped change the laws.
Yeah, right. And they've got to keep changing, right? Forget the tokens.
Right, but you need to appreciate that these things require time, and it needs proof. And the more scams and the more you try to get around the SEC, the less they're interested to try to help you change it. So you have to work with the SEC to show them actually what should work or why it's good for business, and then actually things like the Jobs Act get passed, and even that takes 4 years to become reality. So like,
and still hasn't brought back small cap issuance.
Oh no! I mean, I don't think the Jobs Act was the holy grail at all. Reg A plus sucks. I mean, I'm the first one. I'm the first one to tell them in DC. Like, Reg CF has its own challenges, $1 million cap.
So again, let's stay out of the weeds a little bit, if we can. Tell me, so with regard to Indiegogo, so you don't think airdrops are the big thing? Do you allow airdrops through your token issuances?
I mean, we really work with each of the issuers to decide what works best, so we will allow it, yes. But, I mean, it depends. We don't have the single playbook, like this is exactly how it has to happen. Their playbook is not written. Like, every few months, there's a new nuance to how you should approach these things. So it's really about being as connected to the compliance officers, having high integrity, and making sure the investors trust you as the issuer. And for what it's worth, I mean, we put up less than 1% of our applicants because there is a lot of riffraff out there just trying to get a buck.
On Slava's point there, I do certainly agree that, again, the vast majority of the value will come from security tokens, and that we should be doing everything we can to build the picks and shovels to support those types of issuances, those types of distributions, those types of maintenance of those networks going forward. But I don't think that precludes massive value from non-security tokens, and we are believers, I think many of you probably are in this room, that this category of non-security tokens, whether you want to call them network tokens, utility tokens, or whatever it may be, have a chance to really do meaningful things to the way that value is transacted in the world and the way that networks and ecosystems are built. And we do think that, from our perspective, the laws were not built for those. We agree with that. We don't think the laws are going to change quickly. We agree with that. But we do think that by taking the most conservative stance possible and addressing these things as purely as we possibly can, so again, taking these things that may or may not be securities and saying, we're just going to treat it like a security and do everything by the book as if it were a security, that stance isn't throwing anything in the face of the SEC. That's in fact saying, we don't know, you don't know, let's figure this out together, but in the meantime, we're going to step back and take the most conservative stance and make sure we're not doing anything wrong. And that is what I think we need to do to support this ecosystem moving forward. There will always be the cowboys out there doing crazy things that may or may not fall in line with law. Some of them will get caught and smacked down. Some of them won't. We aren't interested in being one of those. Our perspective is that by taking that conservative stance, working closely with the Commission and other agencies, there's a chance to really innovate on this other category of things that definitely have less clear regulatory treatment at this point and figure out how they should be treated moving forward.
I mean, the reality is you're looking at two folks that if you get put up on either one of our platforms, it's probably pretty legit. But the reality also is that most things get put up not on one of our platforms, and there's a lot of question marks, which is, yeah, I mean, that's why we sound like we're twinsies.
So I
basically
disagree with that a little bit. I mean, I think the regulations are fairly straightforward and can be understood by a competent coder, and can be coded into a token. I mean, I don't think that the first movers are going to have a real moat advantage in the security token space. I mean, I would say, like, look, you can apply what's in the Regulation D restrictions and put it into a token. That can be done, and in fact, it makes everything a lot easier for everyone, right?
Yeah, I think that's exactly, we're right on the same page there. The uncertainty is around those non-securities tokens, and specifically, again, we think how to do the offerings is relatively clear. I think we've all worked on those offerings, but it's what happens after and when it can make that transition and what happens to it at that point. That's what's unclear, and that's where we think take the conservative stance, wait for things to pan out, and see how you can move forward from there.
So among established token launch platforms and most established law firms, you're going to take the path that we're discussing here. You're going to take a conservative approach just to be sure, because you don't know exactly what's happening. When you get in a gray area, you're going to treat it conservatively. You're not going to sit back and wait for these laws to evolve. You're going to step into this gray area and be careful. And if any actions are taken, you're not going to get in criminal trouble. They're going to say, okay, you made a reasoned argument, we disagree with it, and the consequences would be minimal, we would think. So we got time for one more topic quickly before we go to the end game. How about overseas tokens? You know, a lot of this regulation has pushed people overseas, or fear of regulation. People are launching tokens overseas thinking that frees them of the jurisdiction of the Securities and Exchange Commission or CFTC or Bank Secrecy Act and a number of things. Do your platforms allow, encourage, discourage overseas launches? Slava, you want to start?
So look, I would say that actually the market is not in the U.S. The use for crypto is not in the U.S. If you're a U.S. citizen and you want exposure to risk, it's available to you, right? You go on E-Trade, right? You want exposure to volatility? There's plenty of volatility available to you here in the U.S. You can get on Lending Club and do things. You can get on Venmo and send money, right? The people who really need crypto are in mainland China, Venezuela, Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, rural India, right? Those are the places where the actual decentralized use case of crypto is going to explode. So we're very bullish on the international opportunity. And yes, we have had a number of issuers who've come through us and worked with us take the Reg S exemption, even though they are U.S. persons, take the Reg S exemption and exclude U.S. investors. And again, it becomes a case of how well do you do that. There's a well-known case of a company called Caviar out of my hometown of Boston that did not do that very well, and boy, are they in a heap of trouble.
Just to clarify, Reg S is an offering of securities to non-U.S. citizens.
That's right. You file the Reg S, and you can go sell to whoever you want as long as you don't sell to anybody in the U.S. And as long as you've got your KYC buttoned up, which is, I think, anybody on this stage can
know your
enable you to do
customer.
that.
KYC, know your customer.
Buzzwords.
We need a scroll.
Just to jump in there for a sec, I do think this is one of the things, and for the second time on this panel and the 100th time today, I'm not a lawyer, this is legal advice, but
it's legal advice.
One of the things we hear a lot is on this Reg S component, which again is an exemption from securities registration where you cannot sell to U.S. investors, but you can sell to investors internationally. I think there's a real misconception around this. Reg S does not say, do not worry about securities laws, you're fine as long as you don't sell to U.S. investors. What it does say is, don't worry about U.S. securities laws, you're not selling to U.S. investors, but do worry about the securities laws of the nations from which your purchasers are investing from. And that's a really important distinction that I think a lot of issuers are not paying attention to, is that if you're selling as a U.S. company via Reg S to a person in the UK or a company in India or someone in China, you need to pay attention to the laws of that jurisdiction. Those laws still apply. for each individual purchaser coming from that jurisdiction. And so from our perspective, we support international issues, US issuers, but almost always with the US side of things, so helping them sell to US investors and manage that process, and eventually also to international investors via a more formal Reg S process. But there are a lot of countries out there in the world, and making sure that you can handle each one of them individually is a really big task, so you need to pick and choose how you're supporting that.
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic because often tech is born here in San Francisco or definitely innovated in the United States. And I would say blockchain, the US and San Francisco has been way behind. The rest of the world is adopting it much faster, much more innovatively, and much more, I would say, creatively. Part of that is because the US is pretty legit and there's a lot of legacy and there's a lot of good things that work, like you were mentioning. And in other places, people are a little bit more open-minded to taking some risk or not having legacy to have to amortize. They go right to the next thing. So there is a very interesting philosophical thing happening right now from an SEC perspective, which is they're kind of consciously sending this money and this investment and this innovation abroad, which if it all turns out to be a big scam, they look like geniuses. And if it all turns out to be like the next internet, we're going to be a little bit behind in terms of how much we were able to fuel that innovation and invest in those people here in America. So I don't have an answer to that, but I think it's very interesting philosophically. I mean, I would be a little bit more creative. I want the laws to be a little bit more innovative, but you know, it's interesting. Countries like Estonia, Gibraltar, and you know, Korea, all these places.
Switzerland, Singapore. Bermuda.
But I'm trying to show, like, you know, people don't think of Gibraltar. People don't think of Estonia. I'm saying these countries, like, are all of a sudden popping up being like, oh, yeah, come over here. You want risk?
Estonia is a great example.
You want to take risk? You want to be like, I got nothing to lose. Like, I want to become the hotbed for blockchain, you know, and for all these investments. So it's an interesting thing that's happening. Often, you know, like e-commerce, it was kind of started out of San Francisco, but blockchain and these crypto offerings is kind of like totally global. So it's going to be interesting what it looks like a few years from now. And I do hope that we lean a little bit more forward from an SEC perspective. I'm not bullish on that, actually. I'm not. But I would like to see that happen. But I do think the world's becoming flat, and it's reality. Like, a lot of this is going to be outside the U.S.
Yeah, so overseas, it's worth pointing out, all overseas jurisdictions are not created equal. There are low tax and no tax jurisdictions that have created an infrastructure, as Slava said, specifically to attract this industry. And in some cases it works. Think about the banking relationships. You know, if you raise $50 million in a token, some amount of that is going to be in fiat. And there's a cottage industry that's rising up, not just overseas, but in cities in the US. Nashville, for example, has a strong blockchain community when we're not historically a tech city.
The tricky thing is, though, if we try to really adopt those innovative countries, the less positive we look in the SEC's eyes. So that's a tricky balancing act, because you're like, oh, no problem, like we do our, you know, Estonia here, Gibraltar there, but then the SEC's like, whoa, you trying to go around us? You know,
it's going to be hard to come back.
It's a tricky balancing act.
The bottom line in our advice, we say, let the functionality and the use of your token and the people who are buying it determine where you go. And if you want to sell to Americans in the end of the day, and you want to use your token in the United States, register in the U.S. or prepare to register or be prepared for the consequences. If you're never going to be over here, if you're a foreigner and you're not going to repatriate any of your money to the U.S., you're not going to sell your token here, and you don't care if any Americans use it or buy it, great, stay overseas. All right, so we got about 15, 20 seconds each. Predictions? Slava, we got a couple from you already, but you're welcome to make another one. Galen, what do you think the market looks like in 5 years?
I think in 5 years we'll be doing something completely different from what we're doing right now. People often are like, oh, it's 1994, this is Netscape, and we're going to be doing something different in a few years. I'm like, no. This is 1976. Mainframes just went from batch to stream processing. So, like, not only are we going to do something completely different, it's going to be so fucking different. Everything I said on this stage is going to look totally idiotic. Guarantee you.
All right, Andy. I'm not going to back that up. We'll just let that go. We'll say it's too easy. Andy, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think that the chance that we're talking about the same topics even 2 years from now, we think about ICOs. We have this panel on ICOs right here. You all are in the room. We're talking about this. ICOs have really, in their modern form, only existed for about 1 year, probably even a little bit less. The first one's 2013, 2014, but really in its modern form, about a year. to think about the rate of innovation, how much we have improved in the past year, where we're going to be even 2 years from now, let alone 5 or 10 years, unimaginable what we're talking about. I do think my one big prediction, and it is not a totally contrarian one, Slava already said it, massive amount of the value in this ecosystem is going to come from securities tokens and tokenizing existing assets in particular. You think about the size of the global real estate market, it is unimaginably big compared to the types of numbers we're talking about now. $200 billion for the total crypto market cap right now. And as we start to tokenize more and more assets, that is going to dominate. I think what will be important is starting to separate out those as kind of two different markets. When you talk about what does the internet do, and you can say the internet allows me to buy books on Amazon and it allows me to read things on the New York Times, those are not really comparable things. They're just using the same infrastructure. And in the same way, these network tokens and tokenization of existing assets, two very different use cases for the same infrastructure, we'll have to start talking about those markets as different things, not as subsets of the same market.
Slava, 10 seconds.
It's going to be longer than that. So two quick predictions is that I do think it is 94, and I do think we're in Netscape. And when people talk about the internet, they said the internet was going to change the world and it change my life, but they had no idea what it was going to do. It was called Netscape. It was going to change my life. What's it going to do? I have no idea. Netscape. How's it going to improve your life? I don't know. Netscape. And right now, everybody says blockchain is going to change the world. How? Bitcoin. How is it going to change the world? Bitcoin. Blockchain is going to be amazing. Bitcoin. So people have no idea because there actually hasn't been the applications yet. So I do think that the applications will come out of use within the next 5 years. And give you an example of that. Facebook, when it came out, didn't need to be Facebook. It could have just been an email of photos, a text of I'm here now. There was all these individual uses of Facebook. You didn't need Facebook to do that, right? But then all of a sudden it had Facebook wall. And now it's like the network and the news feed. It's like, wow, here's like a whole new experience that could not be existing except for this connection of functionality. We have not seen Facebook wall yet in blockchain. That will come out in the next 5 years. I don't know what that is, but it will be something that can only exist because of this new technology, and that will be very exciting. And then everybody keeps using decentralized, and I know that's what this is all about. I don't see a black and white centralized versus decentralized, just like I don't see online versus offline. I just see it's a mix of both. So I think it's going to be a combination of decentralized and centralized networks, and I think it'll be interesting how it evolves.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. My prediction, short and sweet. Don't know about the token delivery mechanism, but infrastructure tokens are here to stay. All right. Thank you all very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.